This is literally all I've been doing. I'm sorry. I stopped caring about the online left politics a little bit because it's the same circle jerk. Let's do some popcorn, folks. So tonight's popcorn comes with a story, and I will have Zena read it.
All right. Content warning. Please take care of yourselves. Story ends with, sadly, a very big oof, to borrow a little parlance from the kids these days. If you need help, we have guidance on the server. And if you need to absent yourself for a little while, that's okay. Almost 20 years ago, in 2003, I made some friends at a gamers club at a college near my home. I didn't go to the college, and neither did they. In particular, I made two friends, one of them who ran and the other who participated alongside me in a Zelda-based D20 game of D&D. After a year or so ago, we fell out of contact, but a couple years later, I got in touch with both of them again separately. One of those two men is currently my best friend. This is about the other one, whose nickname is Fu. All right. When I got back in contact with Fu, I was living with my sister on the southern part of the San Francisco Peninsula. He and another friend of his, who I'll call Canran, would come up from the South Bay many Saturdays, and we would go over to one another's friends' houses to play tabletop games, eat takeaway, and goof around from another 1 to about 10 at night. When I finally moved into my own apartment, the Saturdays became even more constant, and we would often go from noon to midnight, 1 or even 2 in the morning. We hot-seated Civ, we played whatever game Canaran had run across and picked up at a con, and we pulled out my mother's old Trivial Pursuit set and played with a D4 and 3 extra set of cards from different time periods. I was poor, as I've always been since I moved out on my own, but it was fine. I scraped by, and when I couldn't afford food, Fu brought me simple soup packages, 40 at once, or an entire frozen chicken, or some meat to go with another veg I could afford that week. Or he would just pay for all of us to eat out, and I would get something where I could have leftovers. I got better paying work. I had some money. Then I lost the apartment just as work dried up. For 2 years, I lived with my best friend and his wife, and then I got this apartment. Once more until the pandemic began, Fu and Canaran would again come up here, an hour-long drive every Saturday, almost without fail, for games and conversation, and really, really stupid jokes and watching cooking shows. The pandemic interrupted things, and then I was distracted with starting transition. And then last year in late May, Fu called me. I told him and Canaran about my changes, and once again, they began coming up from South Bay on Saturdays for games and friendship. 1 year ago today, they were over for board games on Saturday. Fu was tired. He hadn't been sleeping well lately. He fell asleep in the Comfort Slime, our name for my unbelievably comfortable salvage recliner. And when he left, I hugged him and told him that it was okay if he couldn't make it up here next week, as long as he took care of himself.
Content warning, suicide.
Okay. And 1 year ago, tomorrow night, he took his own life. He left a note, an unsent message in his phone to everyone he cared about how he was going to stop being a burden on the people around him by removing himself from the equation. This young man, a constant friend who helped me survive through some hard times, was gone because he didn't feel like he was doing anything but draining those around him. And now, a full year later, it is finally fully hitting me. So this one's for Fu, a man with too loud a voice, an inability to decide what he wanted to eat tonight, and the care to ensure his friend will live. A boy of good-natured mischief, deliciously awful humor, and deep kindness, my precious friend. Why are you still eating it, Fu? And that's the name of the popcorn. Fu had a curious relationship with food. If its taste was bizarre, confounding, or just sufficiently unusual, no matter if or how much he hated it, he had to continue eating it. Whether it was so spicy it made him cry, so rank that it was unfathomable, or just so downright bizarre he didn't know what he felt about it. If it was interesting and he started it, he would definitely finish it. So I decided to make strange popcorn. I do not ask anyone to like this. I do not expect anyone to make it. But in his honor, if you do decide to make this, I expect you to finish the whole thing, no matter how you feel about it. Because whatever else it sure is interesting, isn't it? All right. Do you want to read the popcorn?
Yeah, sure. So for the popper, we got 4 tablespoons popcorn kernels, 3.5 tablespoons of canola oil. And for the mortar and pestle, you're going to want to use 3/4 teaspoon of garlic powder, dill, and fennel seed, 1/2 teaspoon white pepper, tarragon, salt, and ground chipotle pepper. And last but not least, 1/8 teaspoon of mace. Just pepper spray right in your face.
That's a whole lot of spicy pepper. It's a whole lot of tears if you didn't already have them.
I'll read what she's reading. Thank you so much for the $2 Australian. Appreciate that. Super, super appreciate that.
Yeah.
Man, Tia, by the way, if you ever want to find this is on our in our safe category. So the moment you join our server, you get on this and can see it. Yeah, Tia, that's rough. Can we share your friend's story? Could we make this a segment? Would that be okay? Yeah, I can't imagine what that was like for you.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you want to talk about it more when we do the fundraiser stream, that's totally cool.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, losing somebody to suicide is such a hard and complex issue. I never know where to go with it because I have so many like different feelings about it. You know?
Yeah, no, that's about my thoughts usually.
Well, it's like I want to, I want to mourn and respect the dead, but I also want to be angry because I do struggle with the idea of
losing people.
Yeah.
No, that is, yeah.
And I don't think anyone should do that. I think I have a pretty strong feeling on that. Every time a queer person, chooses to end their life, we lose another person. We lose another person who, could have been themselves and be in the world.
Yeah.
That stuff gets to me. So,
mm-hmm.
So it's hard because I get angry at the dead and there's no point to doing so. So
I tend to get angry at the situation around it too, right? Like I always want there to be ways and easy ways for people to grasp on when they need help, right? Like that's the big thing that I want for people.
Yeah.
And I know the world isn't always like that. I know that, finding resources is not always an easy thing, or if you're in a situation where you never knew enough about those because no one taught you, you'd be, or if you're just not in a place where you're able to access them for any number of reasons, there are lots of ways that people can be left without help, without support, or just, be struggling in such a way that they're not able to get help in time. So
yeah, and I think for me, it's like, again, this is one of the reasons why, social psychics, my psychic explainer is completely right, why we need better access to mental health. We also I think we need to reframe the way we think about this stuff too, is that I feel like out of every other kind of way to die, it always feels like suicide gets swept under the rug in a particular way. And that always weirds me out. Yeah. Because it feels like because we're angry at somebody, we don't want to deal with the taboo of it. So we just kind of, you're sort of left with these feelings that you really have nothing to do with, right? How do you deal with incredibly complex feelings? Because it's very hard to share them with anyone who's going through this too, because if they know the person in question, they're probably feeling the same. And it's hard to resonate on that. You might be at different places at the time. They might be mourning that person while you might be in the stage of being incredibly angry at them.
Right. And these stages don't even have to happen in any particular order or in any time frame that's even remotely similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, survivor's guilt. Andrew, you're right. Survivor's guilt is rough. Any kind of secondary trauma is always going to be difficult. And the problem is that the person who commits suicide, it's like, was it Fu said is the only way to stop being a burden on others is to take themselves out of the equation. But there's so many assumptions in that. This is the stuff I challenge with clients all the time is but we're all burdensome to each other. That's how human interaction works. That's how relationship works. There's times when Zena's burdensome to me. There's times when I'm burdensome to Zena. Happens several times a day to both of us.
Yeah.
This is kind of part and parcel, part of the gig, right? because we are interconnected. We talked about that interrelatedness, that interconnection in a video that nobody watched. And the thing is that like, there's a way through all of our social interactions that we are connected. We affect one another, right? Our purchases, our actions, our ways of behaving, they all sort of ping off each other in a butterfly effect. And the problem is that like, when I talk about karma, I talk about that in the cause and effect sense, the Buddhist sense, where it's like that interconnection is based on these never-ending series of cause and effects and causalities and choices within those causalities, right? And so for me, when someone ends their life, it's usually based on this very negative and quite frankly, false perspective. We've talked about deconstructing your thoughts before, going over like, how do I know this is true? This is a perfect example. The idea that your loved ones are being burdened by your existence. Okay, but did you ask them? Have they said this? Is this a thing they're doing? If they're actively saying this to you, is this in a situation where they're just trying to vent? Is it a situation where they're being abusive? Is it a situation that I'm not thinking about at the time?
Or is it just like a difficult family situation on like lots of people, right? Like
or is it just a projection?
Or is it just projection? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think one of the really hard parts too is that we've all like, especially in the US particularly, where we live, right? Growing up in a culture that pushes on us this idea of independence that in fact is really toxic to us, right? Like there's so much drive to like grow up, be able to live on your own, be financially self-sufficient, and with that, not really need anyone else, be able to manage all of your emotions on your own, what else? Like all sorts of things, right? And that's
and it's
just not applicable like to that extreme that we get, taught.
Well, and we see this in the ways that it plays out too. You and I have talked about the differences between suicide with men versus women, right? So we're just talking about cis folks because it gets a little more complicated with other genders, but like there's a reason why men statistically are more likely to complete and use things that are going to end them, like guns, while somebody who is, a cis woman or identifies as feminine is more likely to eat a bottle of pills or do something that is most likely going to not succeed. The reason for that is that differences in socialization. Men are traditionally socialized to be independent, and so when they can't find a way out, it's just game over. But with women, the way that they're socialized is based on the notion of social help is okay. You're allowed to do that. And so in a lot of cases, you'll see these things more as cries for help, and not like in a joking daddy's girl kind of, daddy problems kind of way, in a very real way of like, no, like this is a way to send a signal. And the reason why we don't see that on the other side is because of the way we socialize these genders, this very rigid ideal. This is why we on our channel are so big into gender liberation, because the idea is that these genders, when not deconstructed and looked through, you start to get these very rigid patterns playing out. And it gets even worse when you take into consideration country stats, because I believe this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the stats I've seen shows is that the suicidal rate for men is higher here. And one of the reasons they say that is because of the greater access to firearms. Hell, I mean, I'm going to be really clear. Despite the fact that I advocate for gun ownership, especially for the protection of queer people, Zena does as well.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that I don't know where the bullets are in my house. The only time I will ever get to know that information is if we are in danger. Or we're going to the range and most likely we'll just buy bullets there. Because the issue that we found is that both Zena and I deal with suicidal ideations at times. So there's a lock on the gun that I have access to. Zena knows where the bullets are and I don't. That way, there's no chance of anyone using using that weapon inappropriately. If I notice I'm having ideations come up, I will tell Zena to take my pocket knife and hide it from me. Right? So this is stuff that like you have to do. You have to go through and actually like think about ways to rely on and deal with other people. I think when someone gets so cut off and believes there's just this burden, really ask yourself what that means. Like what narratives, what stories was this person given that essentially led them to this conclusion that their entire life is just harm towards other people? Because that's what burden is. Burden's just a very, very safe way of saying I'm hurting people. So yeah, I mean, this is super important. So, just keep this stuff in mind and think about it, right? Like this doesn't have to be something that we have to dwell on, but also just really, this is why we push for deconstructing thought. I recently spoke to another content creator. I won't say their name, but I was joking on Twitter about like, when are we going to get this thing? And that person responded and, said that they had watched our video about catastrophizing.
Yeah.
And said that was really helpful to them. And that was really cool. And, I offered assistance. That person never wants to reach out and talk to me. They're totally cool to do so. And it was one of those things where, like, it just reminds me why those videos were so important that we did them. Zena and I go back on those videos all the time and think, do we need to redo them? Does there need something like, I cannot tell you guys how much those cognitive distortion videos have so little views and yet are so absolutely rich with things to look out for when you're thinking these ways.
Yeah,
when you're dealing with ideation. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we get tons of people in our community and on the Discord, sharing about things that they're dealing with. And oftentimes it's covered in those videos, right? Those videos are, the knowledge about how to work, that have knowledge, to guide people and help them work through things that they're dealing with. Those videos have a lot of that. Yeah, go ahead. I had one more thing after that.
Go ahead. I don't have anything, so go.
Oh, okay. I'm just gonna say, I think one of the big things that definitely has helped me deal with stuff. I deal with PMDD, and PMDD does have a higher rate of self-harm and suicide. I think that's a thing, or at least attempted suicide, as I've seen the statistics. And so, having people to just talk to when I'm in those spaces is really, really helpful. And, the way we've kind of done that is Jess and I have made agreements beforehand when I'm not in a dark space, like when I'm in an okay place to actually like negotiate and have conversations about how to handle that stuff coming up. That's why we have agreement. We do have agreements in our relationship about, we let each other know when we have ideations of any kind coming up, right? That's something that we do. And we have ways to deal with that work for us. And I really do suggest, like, if you or your friends are dealing with, mental health issues that that you're really struggling through, talk with each other, like, before it gets bad, when you guys are in an okay space, and be like, hey, if I'm in a really rough space, can I, message you? Or if you're not available, maybe have a list of people that you message, right? Have those conversations with people, put out those offers, right? Even if at least like, hey, you just got a message and somebody's gonna have to work the next day, but you're just kind of, at least you got a message out. At least you got some way to kind of reach out and let somebody know that you're struggling, right? That stuff can still be really helpful. So I think that's the big thing. And I just don't always hear those kinds of things talked about when places talk about like suicide, or at least all the education that I heard as a youth wasn't that helpful. So I just wanted to share one of the ways that Jess and I deal with some of this.
Yeah, I think the last thing I want to do is just talk about this independence idea that we talked about a little bit earlier. And it's just, I think independence is a lie. I think there's a way that independence as a concept for being an adult makes sense, in the sense where you're not in that same mindset as you were as a child, where you weren't aware of where your things were coming from. But this idea that we're somehow independent, that you have to get the car and the good job and all this stuff, those things are great, but they're not, in some ways, I don't know how realistic they are in today's world. Like, in a lot of ways, like, the sort of idea where you're supposed to have this level of separation, have this level of disconnect, all these things don't really make sense to me. Like, maybe it's because I've been poor and I've lived with lots of people before, but to me, this sort of very deeply separated way we deal with things, it's one of the reasons why I think things like anxiety and depression are on the rise. I think we feel very desperately disconnected. I think it's why people doom scroll sometimes, not because they're just looking at news or horrible things happening, but because they want to feel some sort of social connection, but don't know how to reach out. They don't see their friends. COVID made this a billion times worse.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's an argument to be made here about this idea of independence needing to be let go of. I think independence in the sense of independently being aware of how your world works and figuring out what things you need to do to explain and interact with. But this idea that you have to be completely self-sufficient, I mean, we're seeing more and more people stay home with their parents until ages like 25, 27, because the job market sucks, or because, finding stuff like that is really difficult. There's a billion and one reasons.
Yeah.
It's like you get out with a master's degree, and depending on what field you're in, you might just end up at a fucking Starbucks. Like, that's hard.
Yeah.
So, I just find this independence thing really problematic, and it doesn't really account for the way the world feels like it is.
Yeah, the independence I think that I want people to have is the ability to feel empowered, and like you can affect your life and you can make the changes that you want to for yourself, right? That you can make choices, that you can lead, you can direct your life in a positive direction, right? Like that's the kind of self-sufficiency and independence that I want for people, not necessarily not the toxic kind where you're just so cut off from other human connection.
Yeah, and or where you have the narrative that you're a burden, or that you
exactly,
think your existence harms people. Like all this stuff is just rough as hell. So anyway, love all of you, and go ahead and cut the segment here.
Everyone.
Go ahead and cut the segment here, Shillabitty.
Mm-hmm.
If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.